All right, it's late. It's January 15th. It's a Wednesday. Just leaving the office. I had to stay, well, I didn't have to stay late, but I have a big presentation tomorrow that I'm getting ready for. We got a topic from the comments. This is from Dylan. So Dylan wrote, "Hey, I'm going down the self-taught route since I dropped out of school. I've always wanted to become an iOS developer, and I've been studying and building apps while working full-time. Post my portfolio on GitHub. Awesome. Okay. However, I'm having trouble finding out if I'm actually ready to start applying for jobs. Okay. My question is, how can you tell if you're ready for an entry-level job in software development?" I think this is great. Thank you so much for the comment. Let's get going here. So the first thing that I got to remind people to do is, if you want your question answered, leave it in the comments. If you have something that's more in-depth or you want to be kept anonymous, just send me a message to DevLeader. That's my primary social media, including my main YouTube channel, if you want to check that out for more polished videos. But yeah, I'll keep them fully anonymous. And obviously, if you have more detail, helps me answer. I don't know, just because there's more context for me to work with. So, okay, I think there's a couple different angles to look at here. And the reason I always try to frame these types of things in three different phases, because we're talking about someone who is trying to apply for sort of their first full-time job as a developer. And what I'm going to say is I appreciate the extra specifics around iOS developer. I'm going to say in this context, it doesn't iOS developer or Android developer or website developer or backend, all these things that detail won't. I don't think that's going to change my sort of general philosophy or approach here. So I always talk about this kind of stuff in three phases, and one is going to be sort of the job application part, getting noticed so that you can get onto phase two, which is going to be the interview process itself. So great, your resume and your job applications are working, you're getting interviews. How do you succeed at the interview part? And then part three is how do you actually perform on the job? And how can you make sure that you're set up for success there? And that one might sound kind of weird to some people, because you're like, hey, if I just interviewed well, shouldn't I be good to go? The reality is no, unfortunately, because I feel like all three phases are, unfortunately, kind of looking at different things. And I say unfortunately because I wish that they were much more aligned. And I just think that the reality is, in a majority of cases, they are not aligned. And I talk about this a lot in other videos, so I'm not going to bore all of you by repeating myself. But when Dylan asked this question, how do I know if I'm going to be ready? What I would say is, for which part? Because I'm going to try to go into this in more detail, but super high speed here, ready for being able to build stuff as a software developer. Well, you said you're already building apps and posting them on GitHub and stuff, so you're already doing the work, so you're ready. But then if you said, okay, well, how do I know I'm ready for interviewing? I would say, okay, well, how good are you at leak code problems? And if you said, well, I've never even heard of that, I would say, okay, you're probably not ready. And then if you said, well, no, I just meant to actually submit my application and make sure that's ready, I would say, okay, have you put together a portfolio? Sorry, this car was trying to merge, but they weren't using their signal, and then they just kind of matched my speed. So they were trying to come into my lane, which was going to turn into an off-ramp. And instead of deciding on picking a speed that's not mine, they said, if I just go the same speed, we'll be stuck in limbo together like an idiot. Okay, so if you've never put a portfolio together, then I would say, okay, well, you got to figure out how you want to do that and how do you want to represent yourself and start applying for jobs and figure out what are you looking for when you're applying for jobs. So that's super high level, but I want to kind of drill into these things, right? So let's start from the beginning. So for Dylan, how do you know if you are ready to start applying? And that's kind of phase one, right? How are you going to set yourself up for success? Because if you're not prepared to do that, you're going to be, say, applying, and maybe you don't know the right places to apply to, where to look for jobs effectively, how to get your portfolio and stuff structured. So like, if you, I guess number one is like kind of asking yourself, like, it sounds like you're reaching this point where you're considering, I think I want to start, I want to start applying. And that's a good sign, because if you didn't even feel that way, I would say, like, you know, why don't you wait until you at least have that feeling, or you have that interest? But I'm assuming that that's the case, okay? So you have the motivation to want to do this, the drive to want to do it. That's good starting point. And now you're kind of curious, am I ready? So when I'm thinking about you going through this process of like, okay, well, I want to start applying, like kind of going back to what I said, do you know where you want to start looking? It's probably something to consider. So you have a bunch of options, right? Like an obvious one's LinkedIn. There are other things, like if you know of companies off the top of your head, and you're like, I'm going to go to their careers page, and I want to, like, there's a handful of companies I want to start applying to, like, that's great. So like kind of where you're going to source the jobs, that's something to sort of figure out. Next part is going to be, now that you know like where you want to start looking, I would say, like, what does your resume look like? What does your portfolio look like to kind of be able to showcase that? I've made videos on this before, so I'm not going to go into all the details about like what projects and what to focus on, but as a super high level, if you are an entry level developer, and I am hiring entry level developers, I know everyone's saying, oh, but they say they require like 10 years of experience. Like, this is part of the filtering part. And like, if companies are listing that, then like, I don't know, like, it's kind of up to them to put whatever they want down. If you don't meet the minimum years of experience or whatever, and you're reading through the job description and you're like, I could do this, I would just apply. Literally, the worst that will happen is that they'll go, you don't meet that. And you go, okay. And then it's their loss, right? So like, you might as well just apply, because guess what? Everyone else is anyway. So might as well do it. The system's broken. So I like the idea of being able to kind of like look at the jobs that you're applying to, and then try to kind of go back to your resume and your portfolio projects and kind of think about like, what are you putting there, and how is that aligning to what people are after? So I know a lot of people get hyper focused on they listed this tech stack, and like, yeah, you might not need the exact same one. I will say this for forever, but like, all these skills are transferable. You will notice that some places have less of a luxury of spending time onboarding software developers and teaching them new things. And some situations include, like, if you're a startup company and you had to hire a developer in, you might say like, we literally do not have runway to try and spend like 6 months teaching someone C#. So if we're going to hire them, like, they better be ready to dive in. And that's like, you might not like that, and that's fine. But the point is, like, they might need to do something like that to stay alive as a company. So just something to consider. So you will have some places that are like, no, we're like hell bent on you must have these technologies. But I always share the example that like at Microsoft, I've probably had a couple, as in like 2 or 3 people that are on my teams, not like that have been there when I was brought on, but I mean that were hired as part of my hiring or after, where they knew C#. So like, it doesn't actually matter. Things are transferable in the grand scheme of things. So hopefully that helps. And I wanted to say that because if Dylan here or yourself, right, if you're thinking like, well, I don't know all of the iOS like development stacks, and like, am I going to be screwed? Like, is that the minimum bar I have to go do that? I would say like, no, like absolutely not. Is it helpful to know more? Sure. But like knowing more and not knowing any of them well at all is probably like not necessarily helpful. So just something to think about, right? You don't have to know everything. But yeah, the tricky part is that if you're unable to list it on a resume, then it might get filtered out. You can't see this. I want to call it out. There's a person in the far right lane, thankfully far away from me, with all of their lights off. I don't know if you can see how dark it is outside, but it's dark. And this idiot thinks it's cool to not have his lights on, or her lights on, I don't know. But amazing. I can't believe that. It's like if you've watched my other videos, it's a pet peeve of mine because it's stupid. So yeah, you probably have to do a bit of keyword stuffing on resumes. Do I think that's good? Do I think that, I love the idea? No. But depending on where you're applying to, you may find that like they're filtering that kind of stuff. So something to think about as well. And what else? Okay, so next, maybe that helps, but maybe you want more. I'm not sure on projects and stuff. I would say like, again, try to think about the projects that you're building, because it sounds like if you're someone like Dylan and you've been building a bunch of stuff, for me, looking at people that are junior, like kind of, first job and stuff, I'm very excited to see that you tried building things. And I don't care if you have like, no one's used my thing. Like, I'm not expecting you to have users. I don't care. Like, did you go build some stuff and tell me about what you built? Because you're going to be building stuff. So can you demonstrate that to me? And, I think some people focus too much on like, what's the perfect project to demonstrate that. The other bias I have to call out is like, I'm the manager. I'm not necessarily the person who's doing the first pass on your resume. So because of that difference, you may have people that are like, nope, I'm looking for whatever. I can't speak on behalf of all those people. I'm just telling you what I personally look for and care about. And I'd say if you can list off some projects you think are cool, I would love to talk to you about them in the interview. That's all. Okay, so next is going to be the interview process itself. I think that's a good segue. And depending on where you're applying to, a common interview kind of format is that you'll have like a coding question or coding questions, system design, depending on your level of experience, and behavioral interview questions. So again, in terms of are you ready? I would say, expect, unfortunately, that you'll probably have some like lead code style question for your coding interview, and you may have multiple rounds of this. Not every place will ask you like lead code style questions. I rant about this all the time. I don't think that they're a good type of question to ask in interviews, but it's common. I think too many people focus on like looking for a trick, right? Like, if you don't get the trick in the lead code question, then like, too bad. And then it's not representative of real life from my, 14 years of professional experience. So I don't like them, but I think you got to practice them. That'll give you a better opportunity for interviewing at places. We have system design for someone like, I forgot your name already, my God. Sorry, it's been a long day. The name I was going to say is the person I was just working with. So, Dylan. It's embarrassing. If you are an iOS developer, your system design types of questions may look different, right? Like, system design does not have to be like big distributed systems. Although maybe it is. Maybe they want to talk to you about how your application that you might build is like integrating with backend systems, and they want you to have that understanding. It could also just be like architectural, right? So sometimes system design is not big distributed systems. Sometimes system design is like, you have an app, tell me how you're going to structure the different parts of the app and how they interact with each other, and it's kind of architectural. One of my interviews at Microsoft, my previous skip level manager, 2 skip level managers ago, he was asking me about a particular scenario, and this is actually like a hybrid of like a behavioral question and an architectural question. And I said, hey, by the way, like, I know you're probably curious about like distributed systems. And I said, I have to be fully transparent that I don't have working experience where I built big distributed systems at scale. But based on this question where you're asking about like something I architected, something I designed, shipped, blah, 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 I said, I have a different one that's about like, you know, the software stack that we were putting together and how things were architected. Is that an okay example? And he was like, sure, yeah, like walk me through it. So you will have questions like this, but probably the relevant part here from Dylan is like, yeah, if you're going to be a mobile app developer, you may see less of the like big system design type questions. Look at this. Oh, you can't see the other side. This guy's flying. The other types of questions you'll get asked are behavioral interview questions. And I do have, shameless plug, I have a course on behavioral interviews. It's co-authored by myself and an engineering manager from Yelp. We put a couple of courses together on like career development and for software engineers. But I would say, like, for Dylan or anyone else, if you're like, I don't know what the hell a behavioral interview question is, go look into that and do some homework on that before you start applying, because I would expect that this is going to come up. A bit of a tip here is that on the behavioral interview questions, many software developers hyper-focus still on technical details and fail to realize that this is one of the opportunities where they're testing your soft skills primarily. And the other sort of tip that I'll mention is that put some effort into understanding what they're trying to ask about given the question. Okay, so like, again, there's lots of resources on this. You don't have to buy my course or anything like that. I put it together to try and help. There's lots of resources on the internet. If you don't like what I have put together or don't want to pay for it, that's totally cool. But I think understanding what you're being asked is really important. Otherwise, you basically miss the mark and you spend time answering something that's not helpful. So all that said and done, if you want to know if you're ready and you're talking about interviewing, I would say be ready for coding questions like lead code, some type of system design or architecture. This may be less applicable as a junior. It's totally fine. And then the third is behavioral interview questions. And yeah, try to practice all of those. Okay, third, this is the part I like the most because it's the most realistic, is are you able to do the job for real? And I think Dylan in this case has kind of said what I expect is mostly like probably pretty good to start, which is like I have put together apps. So this is good, right? Because I think some people, when they get into programming, and I say this because I get asked questions a lot on it, like, hey, what are the best resources for me to watch tutorials? Or like, what books do you recommend so I can learn how to program? And I'm always like, it's sort of, from my opinion, it's the wrong direction. Not that there's anything wrong with books or tutorials or videos or articles or anything like that. It ends up being challenging when someone, and you'll hear it called tutorial hell, when someone focuses all of their attention and learning on just following tutorials, because tutorials are very guided. And a lot of the learning in software engineering happens when you're messing stuff up or you're getting stuck. Like when you actually learn. If you follow a tutorial, you might basically be clicking through on things, typing a couple lines of code because they've already put it up for you. Maybe sometimes you copy and paste the code and then you're like, hey, look, I have something running on my machine. but then I'm not trying to be an asshole, but I'm like, okay, so what did you learn? Because you might have running code, but like, did you actually learn anything? So there's nothing wrong with like, you know, getting stuck trying to build stuff. Like I said, I think that's probably the best way you learn. So there's nothing wrong with following a tutorial. I would recommend though, if you reverse the order where like you're stuck on something, then you go look for a tutorial after you've been stuck to learn about it and get yourself unstuck. Like, I think that's a very good strategy. But it's kind of like get stuck first and then seek out the thing. Otherwise, I think tutorial hell's pretty common where you go, okay, like, I think I learned this thing. And then you go, okay, well, what's the next tutorial? And then you follow a bunch of tutorials, and then I come along and I say, okay, Dylan, I would like you to go build me an iOS application that can, I want to show a calendar of all of my notes that I've taken, and I want to have a way that I can send that to the printer from my phone. And then you're like, I have no idea. I just have no idea. Like, where do I start, or what are you even saying to me? And your first thought is like, what single tutorial will show me that, right? Like that's not a good spot to be in. So nothing wrong with tutorials. I literally, on my main YouTube channel, Dev Leader, I make tons of tutorials. Tons of programming tutorials in C#. And it would be like misleading of me to say like tutorials are bad. Like, absolutely not. I think tutorials are helpful. It's about your approach to leveraging them. Okay, so that's one of my recommendations here. But in terms of readiness, I think a good litmus test is like, in this case for Dylan, if you're like, I want to build iOS apps. Okay, so if I said, like, go build, I want you to make me a new iOS app. If you're like, I don't even know how to do that, like, you probably want to have this feeling like, okay, I'm going to go to Xcode and I'm going, like, I have some idea of like what I would like to use. Like the last time I was doing iOS development, it was, that's not necessarily true. When I first started doing iOS development, it was it Xamarin, which was cross-platform, so it was C#, and then I had to do Objective-C. Maybe those are in a different order, but I had an internship with Objective-C and I hated it. Not the internship, Objective-C itself. And then like was back in Xamarin. Then I haven't tried Maui yet, but I've only, like, for my own development, I've only used like cross-platform development. So I probably don't make a very good iOS developer to make like native apps, but I can make iOS apps, right? So my point is that even for me, right, I'm saying I don't really know like a lot of like native stuff for iOS. I haven't practiced it, but my litmus test is if you came to me and said, could you make me an iOS app? I would be like, yeah, I can. And I could say that comfortably. Like, am I going to be super efficient at doing it? No. But I know I can make a cross-platform one, and that means if someone was like, no, I want it to be native, I'm like, okay, I know where I can start looking and getting things off the ground without being like, I just have no idea what you're saying. So as a litmus test to be like, I wonder if, I would say that's probably a good, what I would say is a good gut check. The more comfortable that feels, and the more that you layer onto that. So if I said, okay, I want an iOS app that can do, and then you can think through a couple of different things. If you're like, I don't know how to do anything once I have the skeleton of an app, that might be something you want to spend more time practicing, right? So if you're like, I don't know how to do any of the UI layout, I don't know how to do any of the transitions. What do they call them in iOS? I don't know. I think Android was like activities. I'm not an iOS developer. I don't know. But basically like switching between screens and stuff. If you're like, I don't know how to do any of that like at all, I would just say like maybe spend some time getting comfortable, like understanding some of these concepts, and again, use it as a litmus test. Because the reason I like this third phase I'm talking about is because it's the most realistic, right? Like, you're going to be building shit. So if someone said to you, I need you to build something, the reality is you're probably, depending on your job, I guess, you're probably not just like building stuff from scratch. Probably not, at least not all the time. So let me change it. If I said, hey, I have an iOS app and I would like you to contribute to it. If that terrifies you, if you're like, I don't know how to go through anyone's code, or like, you know, I've only followed the tutorials and like I had to set it up from scratch and it was like 2 files, then I would say like, okay, like maybe just spend more time, build bigger projects so you're more comfortable navigating code. But the reality is, if you're like, I feel like I could probably do that, then I would say you're ready to at least apply. In my opinion, I think, you know, you end up learning so much when you're actually working on real things. And it's why a lot of us will say, like, you know, practice building things, like build software and you will get better at doing it. So kind of I think that's the way I would look at it in terms of a comfort level and being ready to actually do your work. Now, there's other things to consider that you might want to ask yourself, like personally, like, can I work with other people? I'm assuming, you know, maybe it sounds contrived or kind of silly, right? But like, it's worth asking. It doesn't mean that you have to have a lot of experience or any experience doing it. But if the thought of it really bothers you, where you're like, I don't think that I can work under any timelines. I don't think that I want to work on projects with other people. I don't want to have to review someone's code. Like if all of these things are just things that you hate, like you may want to go spend some time looking into them, understanding them, and then kind of recognizing that probably like almost anywhere you work, you're going to be doing these types of things. Almost anywhere. So again, use that as a bit of a gut check. But overall, I'm getting close to home here, so I wanted to summarize before I pull into the driveway. But I think in terms of readiness, probably the easiest one to check, in my opinion, if you're ready to at least start applying for an entry-level job, like kind of ask yourself if you feel like you could spin up an app in your case, or if it's a web application or something. If you feel like you could dive into that and start building stuff without panicking, maybe a little bit of panic, then like that's probably a good start. And then we talked about, of course, we talked about like your job applications. This person's tailgating me like a moron. Doesn't make any sense. Makes no sense at all. Job applications, trying to make sure you're calling out the right things for the jobs you're applying to, and then interviewing, right? So how are you going to practice, and what do you need to practice for your interviews? I think those are things that I would call out. But I tried to cover all those things because when it's like, am I ready? I'm like, I don't know which part you're asking for readiness about. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense. Yeah, I wanted to also add racism parking here. Please don't be demotivated if you're failing interviews or being rejected. And I say that because the reality is it's probably going to happen a bunch. And I don't want you to hear that or experience that and then be like, oh, I guess I shouldn't be applying. I guess I'm not ready. I guess I'm not worthy. Because there are lots of people that are very qualified that are applying and not getting jobs or not getting interviews and all that stuff. And they are very qualified and they are very ready. So it may feel that way, but like a lot of people are going through that too. So try not to take that personally, and say you are getting interviews or you are getting responses and people tell you like you don't have this experience, or you get your feedback from an interview and they were like, you bombed this, or like do this better. Like, it's feedback, take it, keep getting better. You will only get better by doing more of this stuff. So again, please don't, take it poorly if you're like, air quotes, like failing at some of these steps. Like, we all do. And if you haven't interviewed before for a software engineering job, that's like saying, how can I expect that I'm going to like ace something I've never done before? Expect it's probably going to be pretty rough. That's cool, because the second time you do it, it's probably going to be better. And the third and the fourth, they're probably going to get better. And as you're waiting and as you're practicing coding, you're probably getting better. So you will only keep improving. Don't forget that. And I wish you all the success that you can possibly have. So hope that helps, and I'll see you next time. Take care.